How do you calculate the margins of your SaaS product? If you want to do pricing, which is what I do most, then margins can be a real difficulty to calculate for the different products. So usually it goes something like this. The small customers take a disproportionate amount of our service cost, and also the cost of sale might be a little high, where the large customers, they're easier to serve, but their volumes are way bigger in whatever it is that we do for them, and they got better pricing overall, so maybe the margins are lower there. So usually it can be difficult to try to assess how to distribute the cost across the different types of customers in order to figure out really what is the overall margin we have and how do we break it down so that we can maybe look on it on a customer basis, on a product basis, or anything similar. I have worked this issue a few times with some of my clients, and I have come up with a way to do it that I think works for the purpose that we have, which is mostly commercial. So I'll share that with you, and then hopefully you can sort of maybe take and use it somewhere in your business as well. So usually the problem is something like this. We have salespeople. They want to sell to accounts, and we want to know what the margin is. Or we want to redesign our entire pricing and packaging, and we want to know what the margin is going to be in the future. If we have these sorts of questions, then we need to, on a customer basis, be able to estimate the cost allocation on that account compared to that customer's price, calculate the margin, and on we go. Usually what I do is I start from a total cost perspective, saying, okay, so let's say you have 100 customers, and maybe those customers, they are 10 million in revenue, and maybe they are 5 million cost, let's just say. So from a per customer perspective, it's 100,000 revenue and 50,000 in cost, if we just average it out on all the customers. But maybe we don't want to average it out, but we want to stick with the 5 million in cost, because then we want to say, okay, so what kind of cost proxies do we have? And a cost proxy is a term I've come up with, meaning something that tracks something else. So if we have volumes that go up and down over on the customer side, so things we can measure there, which could be something like, well, the number of users, or the number of logins, or the number of activated templates, or the number of API calls. And there can be a lot of different metrics that we can invoke or pull into the math in order to try to say, well, what drives costs? But actually, it's important to say that a cost proxy isn't necessarily what drives costs. We just want something that really correlates with cost, at this stage at least. So we want to say, okay, I had a large customer, for example, they had maybe a total cost allocation of something like 120 million euros in total costs in IT infrastructure and headcount and so forth in the IT part of the organization, so the overhead, and they wanted to sort of push it on to an account basis on the platform that we were selling. And we found out that a really good proxy was an account, like a bank account. An account isn't that expensive to run, but it has a lot of other things that needs to run with it. So there's IT infrastructure, there's different sort of compliance procedures, governance, and so forth that needs to run. There's a lot of usually transactions that correlate with number of accounts and so forth. So an account is a really good proxy, meaning that whenever that goes up, costs go up. Whenever that goes down, costs go down. Does it need to be a perfect proxy, meaning that it very, very narrowly tracks the cost? No. But we can do something like, okay, we have 5 million of costs, and we have, let's just make it easy, 5 million accounts. So we're just going to say, well, one account is $1 of cost in this example that I just gave. And then we can look at the customer and say, well, how many accounts do you have? And then maybe one customer has 1 million accounts. So, okay, that is 1 million in cost. And maybe another customer has 10,000 accounts. Okay, so that is 10,000 of cost. So we can then say, well, overall, if we run it like this, we will get precision on one level and imprecision on another. Meaning that if we have taken the total cost, we have 5 million, that is a known number, and divided it by another known number, the number of accounts, just slice it up. Then we have the third known number, which is the revenue, which means that overall on the entire cohort, we will still get 5 million of cost to 10 million of revenue, so a 50% margin. So the overall margin on the cohort will be precise, remain precise. the imprecision comes with maybe it isn't like exactly accounts. Maybe there's some sort of like diminishing cost as we go to a lot of accounts. Maybe the first account with a customer costs more. Maybe we have a flat, something like this. So the tracking on the individual customer is imprecise. But we want to sort of separate these two out and say, well, what is it overall that we are trying to solve for? Because usually we would like to solve for things like profitability. And if we can say, well, overall, the customers are gonna give us 10 million, and maybe we're gonna raise it to 20. So that still means that overall the revenue is gonna go from 10 to 20 and the costs are gonna remain at a 5. So we're gonna take our margin and take it from 50 to 25 on the product level. So overall, we still have precision. We just don't know exactly if some of the customers still are imprecise, maybe even to the point that some customers will be loss-making while others will not be. So that now gives us a starting point where we can say, okay, so maybe we take some of the cost, 5 million, and maybe we place it differently. So maybe we take 1 million of the cost away from accounts. So instead of being $1 per account, we say, well, really it's just 80 cents per account. So we take some of the cost, we load it off the accounts, and then maybe we load it onto something else, such as the actual account, the customers. And we say, okay, so one customer always starts with, what is a million divided by 100? 10,000. 10,000 of cost, just like as a baseline, because they have customer success and they have like an account manager and different things. And then we say plus 80 cents per like bank account that they have. And that now gives us a little bit better modeling. And then we can keep going on from there to increase the precision. So we still have the overall precision intact, while the customer-specific precision can be improved as we either add more proxies. So we're going to say, well, it's account and users and API calls or whatever. And we can do these flat fees on the customer level. And then we can, what I call, close the gap. So we can say, well, we're going to keep adjusting and making more sophisticated or complex our cost model until it tracks well enough for us to accept it and move on. To say, okay, it's never going to be perfect, because that would likely be impossible, or at least practically be impossible, but it can be good enough for us to be able to start making commercial decisions. So we can say, okay, maybe our margin on this customer isn't 80, maybe it's sort of in the range of, let's say, 83 to 75, but we're close enough, right? And so forth, to make commercial decisions, and then you can move on. Okay, so that is step one. So you take your core model and you then appropriate it to all these cost proxies that you might have. Then in a step two, if you want to get advanced with how to do costs and margins, you can also do what I call costs at scale. So you can say, okay, so, well, today we're 100 accounts with 5 million in cost and 10 million revenue, but really we want to go to 1,000 accounts, so 10 times the size. And then the question becomes, do our costs then also increase 5x in the same way? So do we go from 5 million cost to 50 million cost if we 10x the volume of business we do? And maybe you have scale, so maybe you don't. But if you ask your organization this question and try to break it down on different sources, usually what you'll find is that some costs scale more than others, right? So you're going to have, let's say, some standard overhead on an infrastructure level, and maybe you then have some very linearly scaling costs. Maybe you have some manpower that can handle a certain volume and so forth. So you can do sort of a relatively large jumps as a 10x, and then you say, well, maybe our costs don't go from 5 to 50, maybe they go from 5 to 25, right? So we 10x the business, but we only 5x the cost. That's great news, like our margins are expanding. And then we can say, well, at this stage, what is the right dynamic between the cost proxies and the overall cost? Is it still, do we just like cut in half? Instead of going from 80 cents per account, is it now 40? Instead of going from 10K on the customer base, is it now 5K? Is that the dynamic? Or does it load a little bit differently? And then you do that. So if you have that as a perspective as well, now you can start to project your growth. This can be really good for capital markets. It can be really good for fundraising in venture or private equity environments. It can partly also be good if you are in sort of a price competitive environment and you're growing pretty quickly, because you can say, well, we might go even harder on the price competition because we know that if we grow to a certain volume, we will grow into our margins because we have costs of scale once we get to XYZ volume. So you can see some business models are just very heavy on a platform infrastructure level, but the margins get really nice at a certain volume level. So you might want to use price as a driver to get there quickly. Essentially, it's a land and expand model, right? So having these costs at scale points can be really helpful for you to figure out what the margins at scale will be, saying, if we sell for the same price point, we can get to this volume in whatever 2 years or 5 years or whatever it is. But if we lower our prices, then we think our conversion rate was increased and we can get to the same volume in maybe a year and a half or 3 years, whatever it may be. So we can get to that improved margin faster than we otherwise would have. So again, this isn't something that you're going to use in your accounting, right? But it is a way to commercially operate your costs and be able to attribute margins on an account or customer level, and then work with them in your sales process, but also in your overall pricing strategy for how you want to price in your market and how quickly you want to go there. So the only sort of piece of advice is your CFO needs to be convinced about what you're using it for. Like you're not using it to run accounting, you're not using it for anything other than commercial perspectives. So if he is commercially minded, CFOs will usually get this straight away. More, let's say, accounting purists will notice all the imprecision. And usually, in my experience, the way you deal with that is just to be very upfront about it, saying, hey, there is imprecision. We know that this is an approximation between how we attribute costs on account level and the actual cost. There's going to be a gap. We will close the gap, we will minimize it, make it smaller until we can base decisions off of it to move forward. And the overall cost, the macro cost on the business should be correct. So we're not sort of going to go totally off road on this. So you can get them on board with using this as a decision-making tool. That's the rundown on costs and margins in SaaS and how you can try to deal with them if they're important in your decision-making. Hey there. So I create these videos for free so that you can take your great SaaS product and turn it into a great SaaS business. So if you like the video and you got value from it, you should, of course, subscribe to the channel and also tell a friend. So write someone and say, hey, you're in SaaS, this guy talks about SaaS, maybe there's something in there for you. So that is the only way that this channel actually grows or these videos gets around. And this is sort of how I try to provide value to everyone. I have a network of clients that I have, and I get most of my business from referrals only. So the reason I make the videos and write the books and so forth is actually to just provide value to everyone else, because I can only be in one place at a time. So my hope with all these videos is just to do more good in the world. And if you tell a friend or you share, you can help me do that. So thank you.